Hi everybody, and welcome to Week 10, Part 1, Art of the Indigenous Peoples of the Americas after 1300 CE. Let's learn a little bit about the Americas in general. In art history and archaeology, the Americas are divided culturally into North America, Mesoamerica, and South America. This nearly but not exactly corresponds to the geographical designations of North, Central, and South America. Mesoamerica is a culturally defined place that includes portions of North America, specifically most of Mexico. The Americas were among the last places in the world to be populated. People who anthropologists call Paleo-Indians began to migrate from Asia to North America as early as 30,000 BCE. The narrow body of water that now separates Siberia in Asia and Alaska in North America, called the Bering Strait, was relatively dry during portions of the last ice age. People were able to walk or canoe relatively easily across this dry land connection that is called the Bering Land Bridge or Beringia. As the ice age waned, the waters returned. You can see an animation of that change in a GIF that's located in the lecture. Some scholars believe that during this initial period of migration, people followed an ice-free corridor that stretched southeast through Canada and into North America. Small bits of human evidence of human habitation have been found all over North America that point to a series of migrations throughout the period from 30,000 BCE to 12,000 BCE. People migrated into North, Central, and South America during that era. A site at Monteverde, which I'm going to move the frame for you to see, down here by Tierra del Fuego, dates to 14,500 BCE. So people had traveled all the way down here by that time. The peoples and cultures of the Americas that predate significant and colonial contact with Europeans we call pre-Columbian. This term references Christopher Columbus's journey as the rough starting point for significant culture-affecting contact between indigenous Americans and European. Indigenous Americans we might also call American Indians or Native Americans. The terms Native Americans and Indigenous Americans are often used to refer to pre-Columbian peoples of the Americas as a whole. Diversity in the Americas. The Americas presented a variety of climates for its settlers. Native Americans could choose to live in places that ranged from arid or desert-like to temperate and seasonal climates to tropical or rainforest climates. Geographic features also offered a variety, from plains regions to valleys to mountainous regions. These environmental factors combine with cultural factors to create diversity among the lifestyles of the indigenous Americans. Indigenous Americans from North to Meso to South America pursued a multitude of lifestyles and economies. Some were very clearly hunter-gatherer or subsistence. Some were nomadic, while others were agricultural and agrarian. Others created city-states and even empires. Other cultural values varied among indigenous Americans. For example, not all Native Americans developed the use of metal. Some mined and manipulated metal, but only for ceremonial purposes. Also, some Native Americans used masonry, that is, cut stones or brick, for shelter and other structures, while others do not. Another example of the diversity of the Americas is in the use of written language. While some used oral language exclusively, others developed written languages, including hieroglyphic languages. Within this rich and fascinating diversity arise some themes that are common among the arts of indigenous peoples of the Americas. Most of these themes are not shared or practiced by all groups, but occur in significant numbers in at least two of the three regions. As we examine each of these three main regions of the Americas, North, Meso, and South America, traits shared within those culture groups will be restated. Sacred Mountain. Like other early cultures around the world, like the Japanese Kofun, for example, Native Americans often created burial mounds, tombs, and temples in a pyramidal or mountain-like shape. As with other world cultures, Native Americans saw the mountain as a connection between the earth and the heavens. Large ceremonial centers. Another common theme in the pre-Columbian Americas is the ceremonial center. Such a center is most often found in cultures that build city-states or empires. A ceremonial center consists of an open plaza surrounded by a combination of temples, platforms, and sometimes ball courts. Animals and creatures. Local animals feature prominently in the art of the Americas. As in other cultures, animals or fantastic combinations of animals are representative of sacred concepts. Some animals you will find often in indigenous art of the Americas include the alligator or caiman, the eagle or hawk, snakes, and jaguars or other wild cats. Certain materials and art forms tend to be present throughout the Americas as well. Stones like obsidian, jade, and turquoise are often prized for their usefulness, beauty, and rarity. These materials are often used in art for enhancement and symbolic purposes. Turquoise, jade, and other green or blue stones were considered by indigenous Americans, as elsewhere, to be representative of water, foliage, and fertility in an abstract way. Feathers are also considered precious throughout the Americas and were used, like cacao beans and shells, as currency as well as in art. Fiber art forms like embroidery, hidework, and weaving were also important art forms in the Americas. Although the media associated with this art form do not weather the centuries or millennia very well, there are some notable ancient examples and many that date post 1300. Human sacrifice. Most prominent in Mesoamerica and South America, human sacrifice is another unifying theme of cultures of the Americas. While the histories of most cultures throughout the world minimize human sacrifice, it was a common practice worldwide, with most evidence in the form of bodies of murder victims appearing in tombs of the wealthy or in other kinds of mass graves. In Mesoamerica and South America, evidence of human sacrifice is present in artwork as well, as it was celebrated in the open as a form of nourishment of the gods. Furthermore, not all human sacrifices in the Americas were involuntary or were fatal. Auto-sacrifice or bloodletting, which is non-fatal and apparently voluntary, is more commonly depicted in art. At the beginning of the time period covered by your book, about 1300, some changes have been taken place in the Americas since that migration period. People have migrated, joined with other groups, and dissipated, splitting off and joining other groups again. This is typical of earlier migration throughout the rest of the world. At the year 1300 CE, North America is populated by cultures in many regions, including the southwestern U.S., the woodlands or eastern U.S., the plains, and northwest coastal regions. In Mesoamerica at 1300 CE, the Maya culture has declined, and the Aztecs and Mixtecs dominate the Valley of Mexico. In South America at 1300, the Inca Empire ruled the western coast. All of these groups were affected, tragically, by European colonization in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. As with our other non-Western chapters, you will learn a brief pre-1300 history prior to each section in this module. Ancient Mesoamerica in brief. The Olmecs. Although people had been living in Mesoamerica for thousands of years previously, the first cohesive civilization for which there is evidence is the Olmec culture in the southern tropical area of Mexico in Tabasco and Veracruz. Regarded as the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the Olmec civilization was established around 2000 BCE or earlier and faded at around 400 BCE. The Olmec established many elements of Mesoamerican culture that would last for millennia, including use of a hieroglyphic written language, pyramidal tombs and other structures, like you can see here. Long count calendrical system. The long count establishes a date at the beginning of time and counts forward from there. And the dual calendrical system, with a solar calendar of 365 days and a ritual calendar of 260 days. The Olmec also played a ritual ball game, a version of which would be played throughout the Americas, and they believed that a pair of hero twins defeated a pair of death gods in this game, and that this game helped to perpetuate humanity. Bloodletting is evident in depictions by Olmec artists. The Olmec also traded in stones and shells over long distances, a practice that would continue throughout Mesoamerican history. Teotihuacanos. Teotihuacan, about 50 miles north of Mexico City, was a ruin when it was regarded by the later Aztecs as the place of the birth of their gods. The, the, the Teotihuacan civilization flourished from 200 BCE on and was abandoned by about 700 CE. Teotihuacan's history is something of a mystery. It may have been a holy pilgrimage site for other Mesoamerican cultures. This theory is supported by the enormity of its ceremonial center, which you can see in this view. This is populated by large as well as small pyramidal temples, which are not entered but are ascended by stairs. The larger temples of the sun and the moon were built over caves within sacred sculptures were stored. And inside, frescoes were painted on the cave's walls. Here you can see an image of the great goddess from the Pyramid of the Sun. The Mayan civilization is perhaps the most complex and far-reaching of these early Mesoamerican civilizations. It flourished from about 300 to 900 CE, a time called the Classic Maya period. Classic Mayan civilization reached the Valley of Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Honduras. The period is marked by the formation of many city-states, at which were built large ceremonial centers like at Tikal. The Maya formatted the hieroglyphic writing system into a full-fledged written language with syntax and grammar. On the screen you can see some of that hieroglyphic language in the Dresden Codex. The Maya also codified the dual calendar system and long count systems and used them to such a consistent degree that artworks can be dated by their hieroglyphics down to the exact year. The Maya practiced bloodletting and human sacrifice of slaves captured through war. Their downfall appears to have been an escalation of power grab warfare among the more powerful city-states. Toltec is the name given to two cultures that flourished from about 900 to 1200. These cultures are quite a long distance from one another, Chichen Itza in the Yucatan Peninsula and Tula Hidalgo in the Valley of Mexico. But their work is uncannily similar in a way that belies their distance. Common to both of these Toltec cities is the Shakmol, which you can see on the screen, a reclining figure that will reappear later in Aztec art. The Shakmol is believed to represent either a sacrificial victim or a rain deity, perhaps both. Mesoamerica at 1300. In 1300, the Valley of Mexico was inhabited by several groups. Most notable of these in terms of the artworks they left behind are the Mixtecs and the Aztecs. It's believed that the Mixtecs entered the Valley of Mexico sometime before 1350. The name they are known by today is derived from an Aztec word meaning cloud people or people from the place of rain. The Mixtec surviving artworks include codices or books like the Codex Zuchnadal, which outlines the history and exploits of 8-deer tiger claw. Like earlier Maya and contemporary Aztec codices, the Codex Zuchnadal is not bound on one edge, but instead opens like an accordion, which you can see here. The people known as the Aztecs probably migrated to the Valley of Mexico at the beginning of the 13th century. The term Aztec means person from Aztlan, their mythological city of origin. The major ethnic group among the Aztecs was the Mexica, for whom Mexico was named. The Mexica, also known as the Nahua, and other Aztecs spoke the Nahuatl language. The Aztecs were the last group to enter the Valley of Mexico before colonization. The center of the Aztec Empire was Tenochtitlan, which was built at the site now known as Mexico City. According to the Aztec origin myth, they were led to the site of Tenochtitlan by their patron god, Huitzilopochtli, a human/hummingbird god. Huitzilopochtli told them to stop migrating when they saw an eagle standing atop a cactus and killing a snake. And you can see this in the emblem in founding of Tenochtitlan. The city was built up as a human-made island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. You can see that here. Although Huitzilopochtli was the Aztec central deity, Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, and Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, were also very important in the pantheon. Here in this image from the Codex Ferravari Mayer, you can see uh, Tezcatlipoca, or the smoking mirror, in the center of the Aztec world. Makes him a pretty important god. And here we have an image of the hummingbird human god, Huitzilopochtli. You can see he looks like he's a human that's wearing a hummingbird costume. Here you can see Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl is the feathered serpent god, back to back with Mictlantecutli, his foe or enemy, who's a death god, which you can kind of tell by the skull that he wears. And then aside from them, we also have Tlaloc, and Tlaloc is a storm god. Tlaloc and Quetzalcoatl and Mictlantecutli are all worshipped in various forms by previous Mesoamerican cultures before the Aztecs. At the center of city life in Tenochtitlan was the ceremonial center. The ceremonial center, as in other Mesoamerican cultures, was marked by pyramid-shaped structures. The largest and most important of them was Templo Mayor, which is the Spanish name for the structure the Aztecs called Teocalli in Nahuatl. As a pyramid that was ascended by stairs and topped by a small enclosure, Templo Mayor may seem typically Mesoamerican. You can see a reconstruction of it here. However, Templo Mayor was unique among Mesoamerican temples because it was a double temple. Instead of one staircase topped by one enclosure, Templo Mayor or Teocalli had two staircases and was topped by two small temples. One of these was dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god, and the other was dedicated to the storm god Tlaloc. You can see lots of renditions of them here. Here you can see a rendition from prior to contact with the Spanish, and you can see some Spanish writing at the bottom after. Here is a reconstruction from your textbook based on archaeological discoveries. And here's another sort of 3D view that shows you the various forms of the temple before its final version. In fact, the structure itself was probably rebuilt about 7 times, from 1325 to 1486, and you can see several layers, several versions of the structure in the cutaway view. The excavation of this temple has an interesting story which we'll explore shortly. It's known from the words and art of the Aztecs themselves, as well from the colonial Spanish, that the Aztecs performed lethal human sacrifice at the Templo Mayor. Horrific colonial descriptions tell of tens of thousands of sacrificial deaths over the course of days. But it's now believed by many Aztec scholars that this number was greatly exaggerated, and the story fueled by a desire to justify colonization of a so-called primitive culture by a so-called civilized and Christian one. For example, one account tells of large racks of human skulls. You can see one of these racks of skulls, also known as Tzompantli, in this codex from after contact with the Spanish. So these accounts tell of giant racks of human skulls just lining the plaza adjacent to Templo Mayor. However, recent excavations have uncovered large sculptures like this one that depict large tzompantli or skull racks, and it makes you wonder whether the eyewitness had mistaken these sculptures for real skulls. The shrine of Tlaloc may have been but one place at the Templo Mayor that real sacrifices occurred. The storm god is a creator and destroyer god not unlike Shiva in Indian cosmogony. Storms can wreak havoc and bring death, but they are also necessary for life to renew every spring. Tlaloc's fearsome fangs and scary goggly eyes, which you can see in the vase here, may be inspired by the uncertainty of the storm. The shock mole, which you can see here, is another frightful figure associated with Tlaloc. The shock mole, as in the Toltec depictions, wears a warrior's helmet and reclines in an uncomfortable position. He turns to the viewer, who approaches by the temple stairs with a grimace, holding a bowl on his abdomen. The bowl may have held sacrificial objects. These sacrificial items could range from incense to paper or bark covered in the blood of royalty, whose blood was considered sacred, to human remains. The birth of Huitzilopochtli. The patron deity of the Aztecs, Huitzilopochtli, or the hummingbird god, occupied the other shrine at Templo Mayor. As at Tlaloc's shrine, it's believed that sacrifices were made to Huitzilopochtli in front of his shrine. The ceremony dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, and indeed the process of human sacrifice itself in Tenochtitlan, may have been closely related to the story of the god's birth. The story of the birth of Huitzilopochtli is dramatic and involves other major Aztec deities not previously mentioned. Coatlicue, which means serpent skirt, was a goddess who tended a temple called Coatepec, or Snake Mountain, depicted here. You can see looks like a mound with snakes coming out of it. In sweeping one day, Coatlicue, or serpent skirt, found a ball of feathers and put them inside her blouse. Coatlicue became magically pregnant, as one does in myths, with Huitzilopochtli. Her daughter, Coyolxauhqui, or Golden Bells, learned of her pregnancy and was upset. She rallied her brothers, the 400 stars of the sky, to help kill her mother. According to one version, the mother Coatlicue was unharmed, which you can see here in the Florentine Codex. But in another version, Coyolxauhqui decapitated her mother, and at that moment Huitzilopochtli was born. The hummingbird god then dismembered and killed his sister and her brothers. The brothers were thrown into the sky along with the head of Coyolxauhqui, which you can see here. And the head of Coyolxauhqui, or Golden Bells, who's identified by the golden bells in her cheek, became the moon, and her brothers became the stars in the sky. Here you can see, I think you can see her tongue protruding from her mouth, which indicates that she is dead, and her half-closed eyes as well. This colossal statue of Coatlicue, their mother serpent skirt, is easily identified by her skirt made of intertwined serpents, and it shows her as having been dismembered. She has a woman's body where you can see her breasts and a skirt, but the ends of her arms and sprouting from her neck and from the stumps of her legs are snakes that are meant to represent blood. Huitzilopochtli himself is associated with Venus, the morning star. It's tradition in Mesoamerica and in other cultures to associate deities with heavenly bodies and to relate the solar calendar and the movements of the heavens to one's mythology. Furthermore, it was believed that life followed death, and the sacrifice of the living to perpetuate life in the future was akin to spring following the earth's death in fall and winter. One last item associated with the birth of Huitzilopochtli is the Disk of Coyolxauhqui, another colossal image that depicts golden bells, identified once again by the bells hanging from her cheeks, having been dismembered. The artist cleverly gives the impression that Coyolxauhqui may still be alive by arranging her limbs in a wheel-like fashion that makes her appear as if she's running. The disc was only discovered in 1978, when construction workers went under the streets to try to solve an electrical issue. While several items that seem to have been from Templo Mayor have been found over the years, including the colossal Coatlicue and the calendar stone, which is featured on page 841, no one had been able to pinpoint the exact location of the Great Temple in modern times. With the discovery of the Disk of Coyolxauhqui, anthropologists believed they had found the front corner of the temple. Once excavated, it was discovered that the disc lay at the foot of the stairs to Huitzilopochtli's shrine. When the shrine was in use, sacrifices probably reenacted the myth of the birth of Huitzilopochtli, with the sacrificial victim acting in the place of Golden Bells or Coyolxauhqui. In fact, reenactment of myths and impersonation of deities was very important in Aztec religious practice. Initially, Moctezuma, the leader of the Aztecs, and Hernán Cortés, the leader of the Spanish expedition, were friendly, and the headdress on the screen was a gift from Moctezuma to Cortés. However, it became clear that the Spanish wanted to rule the Aztecs. War, and especially the introduction of diseases like smallpox, for which locals had no immunity, killed off a large number of native people, but by no means eliminated them. The location of the Templo Mayor had been lost due to deliberate obscurity by Spanish colonizers. Temples had been dismounted and buried, and very often Catholic churches were built right over them. This was the case with Templo Mayor. Perhaps ironically, if the Spanish had simply left the temples stand abandoned without burying them, it's unlikely that so many objects from within the temples and the structures themselves would have survived the past 500 years. Despite this effort, native Mesoamericans, including the Aztecs, continued to practice their indigenous religions underground after the major invasion of 1521, though these old practices became a part of a syncretic practice that combined native and Catholic beliefs.